The night had long since swallowed the last remnants of daylight when I first heard the call, a static-laced murmur that seemed to rise from nowhere and everywhere at once. I had always been drawn to abandoned places, relics of forgotten eras that whispered secrets to anyone willing to listen. But nothing had prepared me for the lure of an abandoned radio station, hidden in the folds of a forgotten town, a place whose name had been erased from maps and memory, except by those who still heard its eerie broadcasts. I was driving along a narrow gravel road when my radio, usually a background hum, erupted into a burst of fragmented voices. Amid the crackle, a single phrase emerged repeatedly. "This is the last broadcast. Do you hear us?" The voice was gentle, almost pleading, yet laden with a weight of despair that set my pulse racing. Intrigued and unable to resist the compulsion to find the source, I set my course toward the direction indicated by the distorted transmission. As I neared the outskirts of the town, the landscape shifted. The roads became less traveled, and the buildings, dilapidated and overtaken by ivy, spoke of abandonment and neglect. The radio station itself, a sprawling structure of brick and rusted metal, loomed against the night sky like a monument to lost time. Its windows were dark and shattered in places, and the door hung slightly ajar, as if inviting unwary souls to step inside. Stepping into the lobby, I was immediately engulfed by the scent of decay and dust. The air was thick, and every footstep echoed through empty corridors. The remnants of its once thriving past were scattered about, yellowed newspapers, outdated equipment, and faded photographs of smiling broadcasters whose eyes now seemed to watch from the shadows. I made my way toward the main studio, drawn by a strange compulsion. There, among the debris and tangled cables, lay a portable radio transmitter still humming faintly with power. As I approached, the device crackled to life, and I heard voices, not as distant echoes but as intimate whispers. The voices spoke in urgent, overlapping fragments. "We are trapped. In the loop. Please, break the cycle." A chill ran down my spine. Each word resonated as if from a deep, hidden part of my own mind. I rummaged through a dusty filing cabinet and discovered a battered logbook. Its entries, penned in a hurried scrawl, chronicled the final days of the station. The notes described a desperate experiment, an attempt to capture the voices of the dead on airwaves, a practice believed to bridge the gap between life and death. But something had gone terribly wrong. One entry, dated decades ago, read, "They are not dead, they are caught. The broadcast is our curse." The more I explored, the more I realized that the station was more than just an abandoned building. It was a prison for souls. Taped recordings, hidden behind false panels in the control room, revealed that the voices I had heard were not mere echoes of the past. They were pleas from individuals whose lives had ended in tragedy on that very site, victims of an experiment gone awry. Their messages were attempts to break free of an endless time loop, a loop that had ensnared them in a cycle of perpetual broadcast. I spent hours listening to the recordings, piecing together a mosaic of sorrow and horror. One voice, that of a station engineer, recounted how a midnight power surge had opened a crack between dimensions, trapping him and his colleagues in a limbo of static and faded voices. As the recordings played, I couldn't help but notice a peculiar pattern. Each broadcast ended with the phrase, "The final signal nears, stand ready." The implication was clear. There was an impending moment of reckoning, and somehow I had become entwined with their fate. Determined to understand the connection between these trapped souls and my own inexplicable pull toward the station, I began researching the town's history. Old newspaper clippings, found in a forgotten archive at the town's dilapidated library, revealed that the station had once been a beacon of hope during dark times, a source of community spirit and information. But as tragedy struck in a single fateful night, everything changed. The broadcast that night was unlike any other. It carried not only news, but a series of cryptic messages hinting at an otherworldly presence. Soon after, a series of unexplained disappearances began. Locals whispered of curses and haunted airwaves, and eventually, the station was abandoned altogether. Every piece of evidence pointed to one undeniable truth. The station's final broadcast was not the end, but the beginning of an endless cycle. And now, decades later, the voices were calling once more. That very night, as I set up my makeshift recording equipment in the control room, the radio crackled with static. A low hum filled the space, punctuated by the familiar phrase, "This is the last broadcast. Do you hear us?" But tonight, something was different. There was a palpable urgency in the tone, as if the voices were on the brink of a final revelation. The room grew cold, and I felt as though invisible eyes were upon me. The transmitter's dials spun on their own, and the monitor displayed fragmented images, a montage of scenes both familiar and alien. Faces appeared in the static, their eyes wide with terror and pleading. One voice, trembling with both fear and determination, said, "Our time is ending and yours is beginning. The loop tightens. If you do not act, our voices will forever echo in the void." I realized with a sinking dread that I was not merely an observer, but an essential part of the station's fate. The recordings hinted at a way to break the cycle, a procedure involving the precise synchronization of the broadcast frequency with a hidden signal buried in the building's architectural blueprints. It was a risky, almost ritualistic act that might free the trapped souls or condemn them, and me, to eternal broadcast. The clock was ticking. I scoured the building, searching for any clues that could guide me to the elusive signal. In the dusty archives of the main office, I found a faded schematic of the station. The blueprint revealed a hidden sub-basement chamber behind the main studio, a chamber that had never been documented in any official records. According to the notes scribbled in the margins, this room was designed as a frequency vault, a place where the station's core transmissions were once generated. With trembling hands and a racing heart, I descended into the darkness. The narrow staircase creaked under my weight, and each step echoed like a heartbeat in the silence. At the bottom, the door to the vault was sealed by an archaic lock, its mechanism frozen by time. Using a crowbar and sheer determination, I forced the door open, and a gust of stale air greeted me as I stepped inside. The chamber was a labyrinth of cables, oscilloscopes, and forgotten machinery. In the center stood a massive generator, its dials and gauges long since dormant. Amid the clutter, I discovered a handwritten instruction manual, its pages brittle with age. The manual outlined the precise steps needed to recalibrate the generator, synchronizing it with the spectral frequency. It was a delicate operation. One misstep could irreparably alter the broadcast or trap us all in the cycle forever. With every component meticulously adjusted, I set the generator into motion. The machine sputtered and groaned, as if awakening from a long slumber, and slowly began to hum in tune with the spectral energy coursing through the building. The radio in the control room crackled louder, and the voices grew clearer. Now, amid the hiss and static, I could distinctly hear their names, their stories, their regrets, a chorus of souls bound by a shared fate. The instructions demanded a final personal sacrifice. The operator must speak a phrase into the microphone, a phrase that held the power to sever the link between the living and the dead. My heart pounded as I realized what this meant. The phrase was meant to be spoken by someone whose voice carried the weight of both worlds, a voice that had somehow been marked by fate. As I stared at the microphone, I felt a surge of recognition, a sense that I had been waiting for this moment my entire life. With a deep, resolute breath, I leaned forward and spoke into the mic, my voice echoing off the cold metallic walls. I bear witness to the lost. Let our voices find silence and let the loop be broken. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the generator's hum escalated into a roar, and the room filled with blinding light. The monitors flickered, and on the main broadcast console, a final transmission emerged, a composite of every voice that had ever graced the airwaves of this doomed station. The voices merged into one, whispering, crying out in unison, "Thank you, we are free." The transformation was almost instantaneous. As the generator calmed to a steady, gentle hum, the static on the radio faded into silence. The oppressive chill that had gripped the building lifted, replaced by an overwhelming sense of peace. The voices, now freed from their eternal cycle, seemed to dissipate into the ether like a wisp of smoke. In that moment, I understood the station's true purpose. It had been a beacon, a desperate cry for liberation that spanned decades and dimensions. Stepping back into the control room, I switched off the equipment and listened. The radio remained silent, yet I could still feel the residual presence of those who had once been trapped in the endless broadcast. I gathered the logbook and the schematic, determined to preserve their story, a story of hope, despair, and the human desire to break free from the chains of fate. Outside, the first hints of dawn were creeping over the horizon. The forgotten town, with its crumbling facades and silent streets, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, as if relieved of a long-held burden. I knew that while the station's last broadcast had ended, the echoes of its mystery would linger in my mind forever. I drove away from the town with a heavy yet hopeful heart, forever changed by the experience. The voices had found their final rest, and in doing so, had passed on a legacy of resilience. Their sacrifice served as a reminder that even in the darkest corners of forgotten places, the yearning for redemption and freedom could light the way to a new dawn. But as the road stretched out before me and the rising sun bathed the world in soft, forgiving light, I couldn't shake one lingering thought. Was it truly the end, or merely the quiet before another final broadcast? A whisper waiting in the static for the next soul brave enough to listen? And somewhere deep within the silent circuits of an old radio, the echo of a final, forgotten voice drifted softly into the morning breeze.